Thank you. So as Frank mentioned earlier, my name is Seth Bowden. I'm the Vice President with GBIC. And I was kindly volunteered to kind of help lead this discussion and get everyone to hopefully a little bit of consensus on the priorities that we've been talking about. So I wanted to start off talking about the process a little bit. So as Frank mentioned, Ellen Kaler, a couple of meetings ago mentioned that it would be a good idea if this group came to consensus on a few ideas. She initially said 3. We kind of thought that we'd open that up a little bit for the discussion and try and go with 5. So what staff did, and I came in to help out with this, was to synthesize the discussions over the last couple of meetings to try and pick up some of those thoughts. We also went out with emails and we got a lot of ideas from this group, and we had a specific meeting where we tried to take in all of the thoughts. The discussion this group was going to have around those. So there are a few things that look a little bit different today. Everyone in this room has a shorter list of priorities than what we'd seen before. For the folks on the phone, that should have been emailed out to you just a few minutes ago. And what we tried to do was reduce those ideas so that they hit the very large top level priorities. What we tried to do was make sure that strategies were not part of that. Strategies are going to be a component that we need to bring in at a later date, but that's going to be part of an implementation. Whether or not that strategy takes the form of policy development, whether or not that's just a statement that the board decides to stand behind, whether it's working groups, that's going to be something that's kind of brought together working with the new governor, new administration, and the legislature. There were a few other things that were pointed out to us that do need to be included and considered when we're having this discussion. One of that is there does need to be a broad statement concerning diversity. In regards to whatever priorities we put out, that's going to need to be included. Specific strategies may have diversity requirements as well. So you'll see in this document there is currently nothing that explicitly states diversity needs or diversity strategies, but I think that when we get to what the high-level priorities are, those strategies hopefully will specifically include language that you feel is appropriate. So again, just kind of to back up a little bit for what this board is, it exists as part of a federal program. State language reflects this, but the overall goal here is the state board shall assist the governor in the development and continuous improvement of the workforce development system in the state. So that's very big, that's very broad, and that's kind of what we're asking. We're asking for this to be informative. Something that to take into mind when we're thinking about that is today is an opportunity for the board to identify broad needs, not to solve them. So solving them is not today's issue. What we're trying to do is get consensus so that we can move forward. Something this is not. We need to recognize that whatever priorities we put forward, that does mean that necessarily there are other priorities, there are other discussion points that we have not moved forward. But what that does not mean is that this board is not going to be focused on them. It doesn't mean that they're going to be participating in it. And it's not saying that those actions aren't already happening. We know that there's a broad, diverse group of stakeholders in this room. We know that there is a broad and diverse group of stakeholders throughout the state who are working on a lot of these projects and a lot of these initiatives. We want to recognize that fact while not saying, while making sure that that does not disallow us from making sure that we are stepping out and saying that this is a priority for the board. So what this is, again, an opportunity to put focus on recommended priorities in front of the new governor, in front of the new administration, in front of the legislature. We'd like to get firm agreement on a few, and what that means is we've kind of said we'd like to have, I think 5 priorities is what we were talking about. If it turns out that we have 3 or 6, very strong agreement, we'd like to bring that forward. We want to make sure that your voice is being adequately heard as we do this. This is actually where the point in my notes, it says rich discussion ensues. So this is where it becomes a participatory project. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up kind of the group and open up the floor for an opportunity to discuss your top priority. We understand we went out with everyone to ask about your top 5. That was to help us get the list down to a more manageable set that you see in front of us. What we'd like to hear about is your top priority. We can discover strategies during this conversation, but again, like I said, we're not solving this issue today. We're trying to come to consensus. So with that.
Ground rule. As you discussed some considerations before, one thing I didn't hear you touch on, and it may not be a consideration, that's cool if it's not, is whether or not we're going to develop a priority or priorities that are supported by verifiable outcomes and data, so we can measure success. Is that part of this? Otherwise, I won't take that into consideration.
I would leave that to the board and to probably the exec group to say that with certainty, but I would think that tying things to metrics, I think that's what you're asking about, is tying things to metrics, that could be part of the strategy or any individual strategy. So if you're merely if the group decides to come together and have a statement of support, that may not be required for that strategy. But if we're talking about determining what the process is to get there, I would rely on the group to kind of come back for a separate discussion on what the action steps to ensure that we get to this high level priority are, and if that requires the collection and maintenance of metrics.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So with that, again, this is the rich discussion portion.
I'll just interject. We may actually have 2 lists working here. One is the high-level priority list. The other is as people come up with action items, they may show up in a separate column as an actual action item. That action item may rise to the level of a priority, and that's a discussion we can have.
Sure. So again, I apologize if this wasn't brought out. So just because something, again, isn't brought up as one of the priority actions for this group to take or consensus grown upon today, that doesn't mean that it goes away. We've collected every action and every priority discussion that we've had over the last number of meetings. We've maintained that. Those are going to continue to exist. There may be an opportunity, hopefully, that we can declare victory on some of these within a certain period of time. We can backfill at that point. We can also take a look and see at a certain point in time the group may choose to come together, looking at metrics or looking at where we are, and determine whether or not we need to reevaluate either the strategies or the process. Sir.
Yeah, Tom Longstreth from Resource. Looking at, I have to say I cheat. I'm going to cheat a little bit because I couldn't come up with 5, but I gathered 4 some overarching priorities that I think are categories that I think many of these fall under that I'll put forward. One is to incentivize and promote partnerships and collaboration across these different sectors of the workforce development providers, employers, education systems. So the broad category of those partnerships and creating better incentives and I think the state and this board can play a role in breaking down some of the barriers so that happens on a more regular institutional level. The second is data and creating a better data infrastructure so really we understand what works. Especially under the education section, I felt like there were a number of sort of mandates and requirements, and I don't really support that because I think it's not very flexible. And what we think works might end up not really being an effective strategy, or there may be other ways of doing it. And also, I think educators are going to bridle at being told what they have to do. But instead, I would have use data to understand what is working. So that's where I would bring it back. And I think we can use data to understand which schools are really succeeding in connecting, preparing students for jobs, for careers, which workforce development agencies are working and really preparing people for jobs, helping people overcome barriers to employment. So data was the second thing. The third is funding, and I think that there's just not enough funding to support and we're not investing sufficiently in workforce development just generally. We're not, as a nation or as a state. And there's especially through the SNAP programs, there's opportunities to draw down more federal dollars, and I think that should be a priority as well. So just accessing more money for this. And the fourth thing is to overcome some key, barriers that prevent people from becoming skilled, moving into work, finding jobs, and that includes things like child care, insufficient child care, and the challenges around getting part-time investing in education over a longer drawn-out schedule, perhaps because of child care needs and other things, transportation. I think there's a number of things like that that fall under sort of overcoming barriers. So those are my four.
Sure, and those are taken very clearly. And I think that the data certainly stacks up with what Chris was talking about. It may be important to maybe that's an independent statement that sits at the top as well. That any considerations as they move forward need to be backed up with data. In conjunction with. I'm looking to Matt for the ELMI and Kevin, of course.
One thing I just added is the National Skills Coalition has put out a recommendation around data-driven policies. And
absolutely.
I think that's worth looking at some point.
And that may be, it sounds to me like that's a high-level concern, regardless of what the priorities are. That's going to be something that we need to put in there. I think that you're correct on the education front, particularly in the original draft. There was a feeling that some of that was a little bit, that there were some mandates in there, and so what we tried to do was back up with this language to set these up as higher level priorities. So hopefully we've avoided that in the language that's here. If you have recommendations on if one of those strategies comes to the top. I'd also say that the actions are really going to be indicative of what that looks like as far as the sort of service provider response on the other side. But it sounded like one of the concepts you spoke about, overcoming barriers being the broad topic, but was the concept of universal child care. And some of the strategies that you brought up after that sort of would probably fall under that. So I don't know if that captures what you were speaking about.
I was trying to put a broader topic of barriers and then get a number of sub-components of that, because I think child care is a key one. But I think transportation is up there as well.
Great. Jerry.
Seth, so to add to the workforce side, what I'd like to promote is the creation or promotion of systems and processes to fill immediate job openings. Not a pipeline, but to fill immediate job openings. Processes, systems, and work with the employers which have all these immediate job openings and find out ways in which we can fill them.
Is there language in here that you think that could more specifically?
I've got a lot of stuff which creates pipelines.
Sure.
And that's my fear is the pipelines may be too long for the employers to wait today. So you have a set of employers in this room that all have openings that they just cannot fill. So I'm just saying not to take away from the other things, but add to this list as a priority systems and processes which will actually be directed at filling those opening positions for employers.
Eileen.
I'm going to take a bunch of priorities and stick them in one kind of statement. And that would be to define and develop career pathways for priority sectors, especially healthcare, manufacturing, that range from middle school to post-secondary, involving employers, and make them rigorous programs of study that actually get kids into adulthood ready for occupations, but also to Jerry's point, where you have a program of study, if you have or a pathway, if you have someone who's already an adult and needs to get into a pathway towards the end for a particular training, that it can be fluid enough that it's not just we want middle school kids to be trained here, but we want someone else to come in on this career pathway and just use part of it. And also
So what we do have is, and I know that this doesn't perfectly address what you were speaking about, but promotion of education and training for mature workers choosing to stay in or re-enter the workforce. That I heard as being part of it. And the other thing that I heard, and this maybe speaks a little bit to what Jerry was speaking about as well, is targeting the training for young adults who currently lack adequate employment skills.
But it also gets to the point of schools from middle school on to post-secondary, partnering with employers
Okay.
to provide rigorous programs of study that will give them industry certifications that will make them prepared when they get to the workforce.
So that kind of,
Schools, high schools, career and technical
sure,
education.
and there is, it kind of sounds like that's a blend, again, not perfect, of adding in the promote 2- and 4-year college degrees, apprenticeships, and job-specific training that are informed by labor market
Pushes
data.
all of it together.
Merges all three of those together.
I have to make this point, that is supply driven, that is not demand driven. Demand driven is you have employers who have these immediate openings that need to be filled. The only one of those things in there, apprenticeship, means employment. Of the other things, you can actually have pipelines that are actually happening, but until you get to the employment piece, where employers have openings and they're willing to employ immediately, that's gonna be a demand driven system. The otherwise, I'm not saying the supply driven system doesn't work or it shouldn't be in place, but I'm advocating to separate that and create also systems and processes around a demand driven. Employers can come today and say, I have these 9 openings, I have these 20 openings, how do I fill them today? And have systems and processes that come in and utilize pipelines and actually interject individuals within a system to say, yeah, we can actually use this piece of a supply chain to produce the employees you need today.
Greg?
Yeah, Greg McGuire from Revision. I'm gonna kind of hone in on the education piece, because the one thing that I want to talk about is, as much as you can try to construct something that meets the demand regarding job vacancies or potential future vacancies, it's really hard to do that very much in the future, because business turns on a dime. I know that we as a business, it's very hard for us to predict 2 months out. So for us to design something that meets future demand is always going to be difficult. So what I'm going to turn back to is that you really have to get the fundamentals. It's STEM, science, technology, and having that as a fundamental basis is going to be incredibly important, or is very important. And I'm going to add to that. In fact, there was something interesting that I heard on the way here in the car. I was listening to DEV. They had Tom Torty and Shep Smith, among others, on that talk show. And they were talking about education. And a very important point was made is that we complicate our education system by putting on too many deliveries, and we often forget that education should be for education at the end of the day. And that our education systems are really groaning underneath all the requirements that we have, that provide social services, et cetera, when in the end of the day we need to have our kids be well educated in the fundamentals. Because kids are well educated in the fundamentals can turn on a dime and be responsive to the skill sets that they develop or not develop in the future. And finally, the other thing I want to talk about is language, because often when you say STEM, you lose sight of language. We have a lot of new Americans in the state. It is a blessing to our workforce. But also with it, we have English as a second language that really cannot be forgotten. They are really a superb resource that we are bringing on board in our state. In fact, in some areas with an aging demographic, it is a blessing to have that. But we also have to realize that they do need to have assistance regarding functionality when they do become workers. Second thing is our own people need to develop other than English as a second language. They need to develop other languages as a second language. I can't tell you how much that we as a company, we do business in 75 countries in the world, how much even I, my daily job, have to deal in a second language, third language. In fact that we are not educating Americans to speak in another language, yeah, sure. You go into any meeting worldwide out on the phone, they'll afford you the courtesy of speaking in English because we can't speak in their language often. It's those secondary conversations where they break in amongst themselves, speaking French, speaking German, that we're at a distinct disadvantage. And I challenge any American to hold their own in a meeting like that. And I think that if we're ever going to be globally competitive in the future, we have to rely more on our ability to converse in other languages.
So I'm hearing a few things here.
Sorry, I loaded up a lot, but you wanted Rich.
Greg, I asked you before to streamline this. No, but I'm hearing a few things here, and it sounds as though there is some desire to combine the continuum of workforce training and education, and have two strategies on that, one from the supply side, one from the demand side, to address that. Greg, it sounded like you were bringing in some of the increased student competency in math and reading, but to have, maybe we add technology in there as well. Maybe there's another a word to capture that. And then underneath that, some strategy that we take would include specific note of diversity. And we're going to have to figure out exactly what that means, but if that sort of captures
Yes,
your point.
It captures it. In fact, our diverse workforce, the fact that they do speak other languages is actually a positive.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Hello. Thank you for all the work so far and to call it down a little bit for us. The one that stuck out to me when I saw it in this format, just scanning down through quickly, each one starts with a verb, and one of them starts with the word simplify. And I loved that. So the simplify current incentive programs stuck out immediately to me.
Great. And I think, Mike, you've brought that up before. Not that I noticed that, but thank you. Yes?
This is just point of information to follow up on what Eileen said. There's also the adult education system. And to follow up on what Greg said, we provide English as a second language instruction, both on site in the workplace and in our learning centers. So just as we're talking about the whole range of opportunities for education, we provide an alternative route.
Absolutely. And I think part of the strategy aspect of this discussion is going to be identifying some of the providers who are engaged in that space and who could be better leveraged or more leveraged. Thank you.
No, Rebecca had her hand up, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
Melissa Hirsch is on the phone next.
Okay. Yep.
Like Greg said, a lot of what I was going to say, so I don't want to be too repetitive. But I think that we're two things. One, Tom, you talked about incentives. So I think for me it was helpful to think of two categories. One was prevailing barriers. Another was monitoring, because I think we do have to have that data piece.
Mhm.
And I hear what Jerry's saying, but I really think the careers pathways issue resonates with us because we all have to be creating well-rounded, robustly educated kids. I absolutely agree with you that the only student segment of the population that's growing in the state right now is our Native American and children of color. So
Mhm.
that is our place where we see great promise. It's right now. Every other demographic group is declining. So I think we have to see that as a real opportunity and a real asset we have to leverage. Absolutely 100% agree. It means we have to change the way we educate, and I absolutely agree. It means we have to think about how to robustly educate children with flexible skills that can be applied in continuous learning in all areas. What the pathways do is provide a way for us to think about how the disparate groups represented in this room come together on common problems. So we think what kids need is an orientation to what their career opportunities are. For me, and from an educational perspective, that's what gives purpose to kids. When they're studying trigonometry, they want to know why. Well, if they're working with an employer and trying to figure out a program of 3D printers, all of a sudden they actually have to understand trigonometry in order to program that thing. And that's where there's a real opportunity to bring business and industry together with education, with adult education, with the CTE world, to try to put our heads together and help push rigorous learning, but in all contexts. So that's why I like the career pathways thing, because I actually think it embraces everything in education and workforce that's listed here, and it gives us a way to sort of focus our efforts and figure out
Great. I think I heard Melissa Hirsch on the phone.
Hi, I apologize ahead of time. I'm having trouble hearing all of the discussion, so I'll just simply endorse a few of my priorities. My very first one probably will always be implementing career and technical education for 9th through 12th grade, but I'd also like to see us to consider expanding that priority to include using the technical centers, and we do, but I don't think we do enough using them for adult workforce training, because I think that's an underutilized resource. I also think that if we can accomplish tech ed access for people in Vermont beyond the population we currently serve, that we can accomplish career awareness, we can accomplish employer connection, and some of the and we can support 2-year, 4-year degrees, apprenticeship, all of that other stuff. So I kind of look at that as I look at some of the priorities as rolling up into that. I strongly endorse the Vermont Business Roundtable Talent Pipeline Management Program. I also would put a vote behind the universal child care and early learning, and the last one, the incentives for employment challenged individuals. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. Yes.
Yes, Kathy LaVoy, Franklin Grand Isle Workforce Investment Board. I think in the end, I support the supply and the demand side, because first we have the supply side with young adults, and quite honestly, if we don't get them into the business atmosphere, then we're not going to be successful at all. I'm very supportive of Act 77, although I believe that it's a huge opportunity for us to get things terribly wrong. And that's on the employer side. And that's why I did attend the meeting yesterday with the Vermont Business Roundtable on the talent pipeline management, and I think that's a great way to meaningfully engage the employers into the conversation. Because if they're not part of it, we're going to be knocking on doors that are going to be closed. Because I look at our region in which we have 2 very large high schools that are looking to put in 200 and 300 kids each into job shadows and internships and everything else, and we're already feeling the pushback from the business community, understandably. On the demand side, we do need to continue to meet the needs of the employers that are immediate. And in my job, I do both. I'm in the classroom talking careers, and I'm also working with the employers to do a vetting process for the young adults or even those coming out of college. And for anybody in here that doesn't think that young adults coming out of college lack employment skills, they're terribly wrong. So matching them with high school students or young adults or college graduates. So on the demand side, we've got to continue to make sure that that sector is also meeting the needs of the employers in a process that makes sense, that is driven by the employers.
Thank you. Scott?
Well, I've got one on the supply and one on the demand. I agree with the
Speak up.
I agree with the person who's on the phone around the need to really focus on the career and technical ed, 12 on the supply side. I think that's really critical. A lot of Vermont kids get left behind because of the lack of really opportunity there, in my view. And on the other side, I look at the one around promoting 2- and 4-year degrees, apprenticeships, and job specific, particularly because of the linkage that has to triggering all that off of the labor market data and really focusing all of those around what do we all need, saying we're going to need to hire. And so really, I think when you put those 2 together, one on the workforce and one on the education, you start to actually create a pathway for all of those young people in Vermont to actually find jobs and therefore stay here and have a meaningful path. So those are the 2 I would pick.
Great. Yes.
Diane Delman, representing the Agency of Human Services, and I too would like to endorse Melissa Hirsch's priorities, particularly around the CTE system.
So I'm hearing a lot with the CTE, and one of the questions I guess I have is this: do you see this as a standalone priority that we move, or as a strategy? Eileen.
I just want a little clarity around what that means, because right now CTE exists and we're a couple of different
Okay. So it sounds like there's going to be some.
It's a piece of the
Yeah.
system, but there are
Mhm.
other pieces as well.
Okay.
I just have
I
a
would-
question on, do we just mean that's for CTE centers, or are we being more holistic that it's for 9 through 12, irrespective of whether they're students at a center or not? That's my lack of clarity on that one.
I guess my question is, who's the we there? Because
Sorry?
the board would, as far as, would determine the scope
Okay.
of what that means, in my mind at least. It sounds like CTE has a lot of touch points as it currently exists, and maybe as we'd like to see it exist if that opportunity presents itself. And so where we integrate it both as a strategy and as a priority system, it may show up more than once in what we put together.
And just to clarify, I think this is an area in which you're going to see huge regional effects. So to go back to Tom's point, what works well in one region may not work well in others. So I'd be very, very careful about mandating a model because it will backfire in some regions. And I think it's just being, and I would also be careful setting up a new age band that differs from some of the existing ones in the statute. For example, the Cioffi 177 are grade 7 through post-secondary, and the whole intention is to get us thinking in a more continuous way. So I'd be a little nervous about setting a new 9-12 stand without thinking about how you sort of teach kids up in middle school, for example, and expose them to career opportunities.
That's helpful.
Because
Thank
that
you.
decision making actually begins before high school.
Right. Right. Thought I saw another. Yeah.
I would endorse the CTE 9 through 12. I'd certainly be willing to say middle school through 12. What I didn't want to do is get into the details because of the complexities of the
Sure.
governance and the funding and what's working. I think that's for future meetings and also for the agencies and departments that are involved.
And not to belabor, I think we're in transition in the state right now.
Yeah.
We are already getting requests, and let me just do one, Act 46. We are already seeing that there will be some CTE realignment in the wake of Act 46 realignment. So I think we want to be very careful to let that transition happen, because I think what we're going to see is a much more robust regional system down the road, which is a good thing.
But
I was just-
it's vital, that
So,
we do this.
Right.
All I talk about is the 2,600 kids that graduate and don't go on to anything immediately, and then the next 3 semesters we lose another 450. And then if you play it out into the workforce, there's probably 15,000 Vermonters between 19 and 24 years old. And to me, these are the people that don't leave Vermont. They're here. And they become statistics. And we pay for them in other parts of government. If we can get to them earlier, then that creates a dynamic and systemic change that you can probably see measurable outcomes within a much shorter period. I advocate pre-K and early childcare. That's going to take huge investment, and the outcomes, I believe, are going to be significant, but it's going to take a lot longer to show what the outcomes are like.
Folks on the phone, I'm cognizant that we can't see you. Is there anyone who had additional comments to make at this time? Seeing none, I guess continue the conversation. Yeah.
Just one general comment, and that is that on the piece of paper, we're talking about apprenticeships and job-specific training. We're talking about a workforce that does not go on to college, to Frank's point, but I think as a state, we still are not giving as much value to the apprenticeships and the workforce training as we need to give. And that needs to be done openly in the education system and in the work world if we're going to help these young adults to be successful as they can be. So that may be just a general comment or change, but certainly there's as much value.
Absolutely. Jerry?
Just to follow on that apprenticeship model, many apprenticeships nationwide come with college credit, so it's not entertaining to work, it's a both. So individuals in registered apprenticeships, specifically in the non-traditional field, they come along with true college credits, and many of them get an associate's degree
Or more.
before they graduate their apprenticeship. So that is kind of a standard. What I'd like to do is figure figure out what of these systems could actually prevent another IDX or another global foundries. How do you figure out when IDX was growing so much in this state and expanding? I mean, I was part of IDX back then, and I was actually taking jobs from San Francisco, Chicago, and Dallas, and relocating them here to Burlington because we could build that workforce. All of a sudden, it changes hands, and no longer is that workforce being built. My fear is dealer.com is going to be the same way. I can't say that for a fact, but right now, before they were building the workforce here, hiring Vermonters to work here, and now all of a sudden they're a different set of hands. They have 50 openings, I understand, for software developers. They can't find them here. They're relocating those jobs elsewhere, whether it's in other states or in other countries, because they just can't get those job openings filled today. So what I'm trying to say is that we said come up with strategies, et cetera, to address not only the future pipeline, and I'm harping on it, but the immediate crisis that's occurring from a demand-driven system. Because those players may not be around when we actually have that pipeline ready to graduate and ready to take on those responsibilities.
Jerry, I feel like when we kind of develop the demand side bullet point here, we may be calling you.
And that work is very, very intensive as well to meet those immediate needs of the employer. So we have to give as much energy to that side as we do to the supply side.
So what I'm seeing overall, and this is very simple, so I apologize, I'm not gonna capture everyone's points of view here as we're going through, but the points that I saw that were heavily agreed upon, career and technical education, we're gonna need to figure out exactly what that language says and how that's implemented. We wanna make sure that we're safe, not overstepping what we're trying to do in putting mandates on folks, but we also wanna recognize that it's a dynamic system as it currently exists. So it sounds like that is a strongly felt bullet point. The competencies, math, technology, and reading, with the diversity component in the strategy, sounded like it was another one that had sort of broad agreement. There was a bunch of agreement with the talent pipeline management, but I think earlier in the meeting we may have already said that that was thumbs up, and we're gonna say that that's something we're going to endorse as a group. Then there were sort of the conglomeration of the three bullets between workforce and training for mature workers, 2 and 4 year college degrees, apprenticeship, job-specific training targeted by labor market data, and then target training for young adults lacking employment skills who are either under or unemployed. There's going to be, it sounds like, 2 bullets that kind of try and tackle that, one from the supply and one from the demand side. And to back up, I think that we were looking for maybe an overall statement that systems and processes all include labor market data and are driven by data, so that we know if we're actually tackling this. And there was the simplifying current incentives program. I'm still, where are people on the universal child care as a strategy that this group would like to endorse? Or, I'm sorry, as a point that we would like to put forward, not as a strategy. I apologize.
Just to go back, one thing I didn't hear specifically that I think Frank alluded to, and I'm just gonna put it a different way. We know that the poverty ratio for kids in the public system has doubled since 2008. So our student population is really struggling with diversity in a way that previous generations didn't. And I think that is a piece of why people are feeling that kids coming out may not be prepared. And I think what Frank's point was, it's not just universal, but we have a targeted group that has acute needs, and we know that investment early enables them to enter school on a path and ready to learn. So I think that may be a way to think about it.
Okay. So I think if I count.
I also thought that I heard the word career pathways coming up numerous times.
Yes.
That it fits into a coordinated system, it fits into how people work their way up career ladders, it fits into everything we talk about. If we support apprenticeships, you need to support pre-apprenticeships and what comes before. So I think that's a significant, don't want that lost.
Yeah, workforce supply continuum, career pathways, I think, is something that we're going to have to incorporate, probably both on the supply and demand side when we draw those up. But in my mind, I think that's 7 bullets. that we're looking at, which doesn't get us to, you know, where we are, but no one's thrown a chair, so we're in pretty good shape right now. Are there, yes?
I think we need to engage the people who aren't engaged, because we have a workforce that stays at home, and they're staying at home because they enter the workforce, their wages are low, they have childcare issues, transportation issues, and, you know, the benefit cliff.
Is there a specific strategy? Is there language, I guess, what I would be asking you for that could that be a strategy under what we're already suggesting, or is this a priority for the group that you feel needs to be expressed separately?
Well, I think there's a lot of folks out there that could be filling jobs, and because of these issues, they aren't. And when you can stay at home and be more financially viable than going to work, I think it needs a really hard look.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Joe?
we've heard that expressed many times by employers, and in fact, it's actually an impediment to growth in their own wage because of people afraid of their childcare and other credits going away. I mean, you know, maybe we put that in under the overall barrier, sort of barriers to employment or barriers to fully engaged employment. I don't know how to word that.
Thank you. Yes?
The Agency of Human Services has looked at the benefits list in many different ways over the years, and it's a massive investment. And I just am not sure the state will ever make the full investment. However, I think preparing people for higher wage jobs is an alternative strategy to get at the benefits list. If we're helping people to get jobs so they can pay childcare and have a car, that is at least one way to get around the benefits list.
Thank you. Again, going back to the phone, is there anyone who hasn't had an opportunity? Seeing none, I guess I'm trying to get a feel for the room here. If we want to say that we kind of had this rich discussion, just as the notes told me that we would. And do you want? Would you like staff and the group to get together, maybe try and reword what some of these are? It sounds like it's going to be more than 5, but I'd like to keep it maybe under 7. Maybe we can get to that 6 number the way that we decide to do this. We're going to try and capture some of that language that you had, putting it under those bullets to make sure that they're incorporated in the strategy. We're obviously going to have to get a lot of feedback as to whether or not we've done that appropriately, but does the group feel that that's an appropriate level for where we are right now? Or are there other concerns, questions, comments, and concerns, as they usually say?
What's the process after this?
I'm going to hand it over to Frank, but one of the discussions that we kind of had, the process after this, I think immediately we're going to have to get back together, take a look at language, make sure that it appropriately addresses what we can capture from this conversation. And we're going to have to probably rely on the executive committee to make sure that we've addressed that to a certain extent, and then bring it back out to the full group to be able to comment on that. I think we're probably still at least a step away from actually wordsmithing it, but to bring that out and make sure that there aren't additional things we'd like to capture. But I think that if the group is comfortable with sort of that overarching conversation being what is going to be brought forward, then we've concluded a list of 50 down to about 6.
I missed some previous conversation, but it's important to me that someplace in there we recognize that these efforts have to be brought regionally, because I think somebody over here said it. So I want to be sure that no matter what's identified, that there's recognition that the regional effort from region to region might do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't know if there was additional.
You nailed it.
Sorry, I made you
Yep.
stand
Thank
up.
you.
Stand up for no reason. So with that.
Well, Eileen had.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One last thing. take somebody, you know, not just say, well, you need to have a bachelor's degree, but to look at the skills, you know, because we're going away from things like, we're going to proficiencies. So if you get someone who is proficient in these things, there has to be kind of a partnership there so that employers understand the language we're using and things like that, and don't just say, you have to have a bachelor's and 2 years experience. You know, so there needs to be communication along the way as we're changing education and training to make sure that employers know and they're willing to work with us on this.
Certainly. Thank you. Tom?
I just want to go back a little bit to the data. There was a screen that popped up a moment ago that talked about a data-driven policy, and I think part of the problem currently is that we just don't measure all the right things. We don't have a means to know how well we're doing in some key areas, and I think that's we have to, before we can have a data driven policies, we have to have data infrastructure that would tell us on a continuing basis how we're doing and what, and I think that's a sort of a more architectural, structural breakdown barrier that prevent the tax department from sharing information about payroll information and so that we can just have more systemic connections between the policies and the programs and that are delivering the services. So I just want to make
No, that's a point well taken.
Use data, but it's
right.
Get the data and to figure out what we don't know so that we can start asking those questions.
It's acknowledging the system that we currently have and maybe where some of those limitations or concerns presently exist. So I think that certainly needs to be captured in the barriers. So I'm not sure if there's further discussion that we need to have or if this is an opportunity to kind of declare victory on the day at least. And we can make some additional, Abby's been taking notes, and unfortunately it doesn't sound like she's going to be the one who can help us synthesize this, as she's going to be appropriately leaving tomorrow, unfortunately. But we're going to take, I think, our best shot at trying to get all this information together and capturing the conversation to fit it under a select number of bullets and bring it back out to the board to have further conversations. So with that, I'm going to say thank you.
The oldest rule is always hire somebody smarter than you and get out of the way. Thank you, Seth. Great job. I appreciate that. I think, is there any other business today? It's snowing out, and I wanted, if we ended early, to give everybody time to travel home. I do want to say thank you to all of you for your work and your time and efforts that you put in. And one last appeal, I did say a number of the state folks were out of the room, but I did have the opportunity yesterday to meet with the governor-elect. And the tough thing for some of us that have been around through transitions or have been part of transitions is a lot of times that there is turnover in the secretary's positions and commissioner's positions. And I got the feeling from the governor yesterday that he hasn't made a lot of decisions yet on secretary's positions, commissioner's positions, deputies. And I would encourage you that if you have recommendations, go to his transition site and make the recommendations. Please make the recommendations that you feel are important. I think he's very open. I left the meeting thinking that he was very open to looking at existing talent, new talent, and very, very, very open, and that was encouraging. And lastly, I want to thank Annie, Rebecca, Joan, the other folks that that have been a part of this administration. Governor Shumlin had a team of really, really sharp people throughout the secretary positions, the commissioner positions, and it's been a lot of fun working with you folks, and I hope we get to work with a lot of you moving forward. Lisa, I'm sorry. My apology. I don't have my glasses on, so. Sorry. But anyway, thank you all. I guess we're adjourned, and happy holidays to everybody. Thank you. Yep.